counter offer. We ended up accepting, and I met my husband.
At that time, immigration is what formed this country. You know, it was all these different ideas and different philosophies.
My father and David were like a two peas in a pod. They loved each other. Gloria will tell you they absolutely loved each other.
So the question that you have to ask yourself is not only do you have to challenge yourself to remember this history, but you also have to ask yourself, who will write yours?
And that's where home plate was. And if you hit it to left field, there was a chicken coop in left field.
Hello, good morning. My name is Howard Jaffe, and I'm a descendant of the Goldfine family, which was one of the original settlers' families. And right now I'm on the board for the old synagogue, which is the oldest in New Jersey as far as farming community. It's the only one that's been around for 170 years plus that still has a congregation and still you can come to. I'm on the board for the synagogue, and also about 6 years ago we started a organization called the Alliance Community Reboot, which was started to honor the colony's start and to bring it up to date and have things like this, different tours and interviews. Also, there was a documentary made, the Alliance documentary, that told the whole story of from the start to the beginning. We still have programs that we do through the Alliance Community Reboot, and through the Alliance Community Reboot, we're tied back to our history and our families of farming. The first wave was 1882 is when the original settlers, the Bayeks, which we'll see his original house in a little bit, he came with 42 families, and they came to like a barren area. It was a barren area here. Originally, most of them came out of Russia, around the Kiev area and Bessarabia, which is south and closer to like in between Romania and Odessa. So those families, during the Tsarist time, there were things called pogroms. Pogroms were when the Russians would come into the Jewish settlements called shtetls and burn them and chase the people out and just move into their homes. So a lot of people right at that time just like left with what they had on their back basically and what they could grab. A lot of them were there for basically centuries, and they had like 24 hours to leave. They came, and a lot of them, if they had any money or any, funds, they all tried to make it. Some emigrated to Israel before it was when it was Palestine. And some of them emigrated to America by way of basically walking across Europe to get to either England, like Liverpool, a lot of the ships went out of there. A lot of the ships that came to America left out of Holland. So they get here after this exhaustive trip. They didn't have money for first class, steerage. So they called it, what it was called was steerage, was you paid hardly any money and you were in like the belly of the ship. You didn't have it was just people on whatever they had to stay on, and it was always the roughest part, so people would be sick, and they had little kids, and the air was bad. And then they got to America, and before there was Ellis Island, there was a place called Castle Garden, and that's where the immigrants coming into America came in, and that was like on the southern tip of New York, Manhattan, around Battery Park. So they come, and now they're in a new land, don't really speak the language, because many of the Russian Jews, they only spoke Russian or Yiddish. So here they come in this new land, they're asked questions like, what's your name? And there's funny stories of people would, they didn't even understand the question. So they would be like, in Yiddish, there's vergessen, means I don't know, or I forgot. And they would write their last name down as Ferguson. So people would be like, well, how these Jewish people Ferguson? That's, So that was kind of a funny thing that happened. And like my ancestors, when they came, the gold finds, they were on the Lower East Side. They went into the tenements, and they worked there for a couple years. And then they had one brother that was in America, and he heard about the Jewish organization. There was Amolim, and there was an organization from the Baron de Hirsch that helped to get land in many different, because in America it wasn't just Alliance, there were a lot of different, we're the only one that still basically has people or anything, but they were spread out all the way to like North Dakota, Texas, all over these agricultural settlements, also South America. So when my relatives came, the uncle heard about that, got him involved with that, and there was two brothers that came together from Russia with their families, and that's when they came down here, and they started farming. Here these people came, and they were originally just living in tents in wintertime, and then they came, and they built, there's a road up there, and it's where the firehouse is now. They had a barracks. So all the families only had like a little place to put theirs, but all those families lived together. And then they finally, like when Bayek, he built his house, and then there were like all along this way, all along Gershel Avenue here, there's some of the older houses that were from the original settlers after they moved out of that. And even the farming here it wasn't easy even to get started farming, because none of this all the land looked like that, like those woods. There wasn't like clear open fields to where you could just go and like, hey, I'm going to be able to plant corn or this. That's what they were dealing with that. So trees had to be taken down, stumps had to be pulled out. And the whole colony after the first winter almost just wasn't going to make it until there was an influx of money from Philadelphia that helped them to make it through that winter and into the next year, and to be able to do a lot of farming. And the other thing is, a lot of the original settlers, they weren't farmers. They were merchants in Russia. They were, they had all different kind of jobs, but they weren't really farmers. So a lot of their farming knowledge came from the other people that have been here of different faiths and different ethnicities, and they actually helped the people to, be able to farm. They told them, you can farm this, is better to farm that. And without that help and that influx of money, I doubt if the colony would have even lasted. The whole farming community here probably only lasted one generation, because what happened is, as people came to America, the children got educated and things, and farming life, as everybody knows, is pretty tough and not a lot of money. So as they saved money, the original farmers, they pushed for their children to get an education, leave the farm, and, you know, go to university. And Moses Bayek was the original one that basically got the whole colony together. He was like the leader of those original 42 families. So he's the one that actually, you know, got the land and brought it together, and really was the leader of the colony at that time. So his house is there, and William Levin and his wife Malia decided, because William was born in the house across the street here, and we'll see it in a little bit, there's a garage, and there's the old Bayek house, and then there's a house next to it, which was Harry Levin, which was William's grandfather, where Bayek was William's great-great-grandfather. And Harry Levin was a judge, a lawyer, and he's the one that got a lot of immigration papers together for the immigrants, because, I mean, my grandparents basically only spoke Yiddish and Russian, and it was the same for, you know, a lot of the other original families, the immigrants that came here. So Harry Levin, he was like a lawyer in that, so immigration papers, and he took care of the tax papers and things like that. And as time went on, this was like, there was kind of a heyday in the 70s when there was still a lot of, it was like in between, there were still a lot of families around. And that's when there's stories about down the road here, there's a river, and all the families would meet and go to swim in there, and they had a concession stand, and they would play cards. So that was like the entertainment for all the families that were here. And also at one time there were 2 hotels. One is on the corner of the river, and the other is halfway up to the river. It was the Hirsch Hotel, and that was the biggest, and they did a lot of celebrations, things like that, and people would come down. And going back though, during the Depression, when everyone was still farming by that time, there were still a lot of people farming. A lot of those families still had people that they were related to in New York and all, and a lot of those families couldn't really afford, even during the Depression, to feed their kids. So what they would do is they would ship their children down here, and their children would stay with relatives on the farm. Not that it was any money on the farm, but everybody ate because they were farming, so they had vegetables and all that. And I also remember like stories from my grandmother that they used to have like people from down south that would be like migrant workers that would come up, and they would bring their children during harvest time, but they would come so many years to help on the farm that they were like family. So, you know, like my grandmother would make sure there was like milk for the kids and food. So it was like during those tough times, it was a haven here for people that, you know, were really down and out with the Depression, because if you're on a farm, there's always food. You know, there's no money, you know, you might not be able to do a lot of entertainment, but then again, they had the river, and they had other forms of entertainment, and, you know, just helping out on the farm and things like that. And then if you bring it up from there to like present day today, there's myself and about 4 other families that actually still live in this area that are Jewish, and then there's some that have spread out to other people, other places, and there's a lot that have spread out all over the world basically, because we keep a list, and just on our list alone we have over 600 people that prescribe to or subscribe. We have a online newsletter, and that goes out to them, and there's so many people are like interested, you know, and they want to know what's happening now and that. So it's really nice, and, you know, it's nice that we can keep it up. Right now we're standing at this is the oldest gate, which is across the street from the synagogue of the cemetery where basically all the people that came through Alliance are buried. And this is the older gate, and then as we go out, there's the newer section. But this is where the oldest tombstones are from the original people that came. And there's also a lot of stones of children, because it was such a rough life when they first got here that they had a lot of mortality of infants and stuff. And then as you go back further, where you see the larger headstones, that's the end of that cemetery, the original one, and then this one got built. All right, and now this is in the cemetery at Alliance. This is a memorial to the people that perished in the Holocaust, because many of the families that came here, there were a few waves of families. There were first the Russians that came way back in the original families, but then there was also, between here and Vineland, was a great immigration after the Holocaust and actually before the Holocaust. So this side of the cemetery has many Holocaust survivors, and there's even a lot of the graves don't have bodies in them, because to memorialize families that when they came here, to have them in their memory, they put up a gravestone and got a plot, but of course the bodies, were lost during the Holocaust. And looking here this is the entrance to the memorial, and this archway is to remember the archway going into to Auschwitz. This is an archway like this was how the people, the trains came in and went there, and the people came under this archway. The Rabs were a family, and they had a kosher chicken slaughterhouse in Vineland, and they actually were very instrumental. They both lived through the Holocaust. Mrs. Rab, she actually was in the concentration camp Sobibor, and that's the one that a lot of the Jews escaped from. And she was actually one of the technical advisors to keep that movie on base as historical as possible. And Mr. Rab he was in Auschwitz and a couple other camps, and he got out and then came here. They immigrated to this area and had a chicken farm, and then went into this chicken processing. So they did a lot of that. You'll see on there's a few different panels that actually, talk about the Rabs and, the dedication to the Holocaust and the people that perished. These are all dedications, in Jewish we call it a yurtzeit, which is like a memory of past people. And all of these are different families put in, and where the people were from, and in the memory of if they were sisters or parents and people that perished during the Holocaust, all along here. And the memorial was set up as the different concentration camps. You have Auschwitz, which was probably one of the biggest concentration camps that everybody knows of. But there's all these were all concentration or work camps, not necessarily death camps, but a lot of people still died in them, of course. So you have Babi Yar, Belzec, Bergen-Belsen, Breckenwald, Birchwald, Klemo, Dachau, Majnak, Mauthausen, Honor, Sobibor, it's the one where Mrs. Rab escaped from, Stutthof, Kronstadt, Treblinka, and Warsaw. And then the pillars all represent the coming together, the embrace of the whole experience. And then the center is the the eternal flame that, you know, basically is it's like a rendering of, with the arms coming up, and the eternal flame is like the hope of the people, like coming up from the ashes. And we get a lot of people come, and it's a nice place to like reflect on things. So we have a lot of people come, and they'll just, you know, people that had lost family, or just people that are interested in the history of the Holocaust. And, you know, they'll come and just, you know, some of them still, you know, they have the nameplates of family people, and just they'll come to like kind of meditate. And, you know, you don't find this large of a memorial in like a small cemetery like this. That's what like makes it really special, you know? All right, now we're at the property of the Alliance Community Reboot. This was a garage that was built in the 70s behind the original settler's house. The biggest house here was the Bayek house, and we'll see that in a minute. But we decided, we had a rabbi come that does murals to depict the story of the people coming from Alliance. So, coming to Alliance. So this first kind of panel that you see with the flames is where the Jews were getting burnt out of Russia. So from there, you see the ship, the immigrants that left Russia would have taken a ship across the Atlantic, probably getting on in either Liverpool or Hoek van Holland in the Netherlands. And since they didn't have money, they would be in the lower part of the ship in steerage. And then this depicts the people actually getting to America. Now, back then, there wasn't Ellis Island. It was called Kessel Garden, is where the new immigrants would come. So this was them, and coming off, where they would come off the ship, and then they, you know, came into America, and then went on their way from there. And then we come to, this is the land here when they finally came here and started having farms. This represents the farming of the area, and this is a red heifer that, with the fruit, kind of denotes the agriculture part. And the red heifer has basis in Judaism as renewal and different kind of like a change of life. So it kind of fits in with the whole story of him coming here. This was Mr. Brotman, the one that brought the clothing factory down. And if you were to see a picture of his great-grandson, they look like almost alike. And there is a website about the mural that explains it's probably a little bit more in depth and better. But there is a picture of him and his great-grandfather, and it's like almost the same face. It's really funny. That side really depicts the earlier settlers coming from Russia and Ukraine. This side also picks up on the Holocaust. As you can see, behind the mule is barbed wire. So the barbed wire represents the Holocaust, and the egg and the chicken are a lot of those German farmers that, well, no, they weren't farmers, but a lot of that second wave that came raised chickens and eggs. And the mule is a representation for, you know, working the fields, because there weren't, you know, in the people still used, mules and horses for plowing and working your fields. This gentleman is Krasenstein. He was known for, he was a very wise, not really a rabbi, but a very wise man. And he had many hats in the Alliance. As you can see, he has the knife in his hand and the bird. So he was the shochet. And a shochet is a person that is a rabbi, but not a teaching rabbi, that does a blessing, and he's the one that kosher kills chickens. But also you can see how that little box on his head and the straps on his arm, that's called tefillin. And the tefillin is when Orthodox Jews or any Jews pray, the box has inside, there's parchment that has writings from the Torah in it. And then the arm, there's also a box that goes on your forearm, and that also has the writings. And there's 7 bands, and in the hand, it makes the letter Shin. And that's used in morning prayers usually. But you could do, a lot of people do it anytime, just because it gives like kind of a physical bond to prayer. You know, instead of just like reading out of a book, you're actually, you know, doing something physical. So it bonds that together. So, and then as we come to this side, as you can see, this is the back of the old Bayek house. The one that, this was William Levin's great-great-grandfather. And this side depicts like more modern day. So this is the street sign right over there. It's at Gershel and Schiff. And this is Moses Bayek, whose house that was. That he was the original, and you see he's holding up grapes because he grew the grapes in a little bit more modern time. And this is a rendering of this house. More like shows more of the modern time, like, you know, the house is good. It's not the 1800s house. He's not dressed in, you know, in clothes from like the 1800s. It's more, you know, more modern. So this is like kind of the end of the road, you know, like of the whole going through the history. And that's the sign. Schiff and Gershel is like, wow, that's like kind of the end of the road. And then the, you know, the mailbox and the house. Okay, welcome to the Alliance Synagogue, which is located across from the Bayek House and the Alliance Cemetery. And we're located at 9 Schiff Avenue and in Norma, New Jersey. The synagogue was probably started around 1882, and it was finished probably around 1886. And everything here is the original. The style of the synagogue is reminiscent of the architecture of Eastern Europe, where they always had a lot of synagogues had the separated upper, but the upper with the pedestals and things held, because in Orthodox synagogues, the men pray separate from the women. So the women were upstairs and the men would pray downstairs. Of course, in newer times, we don't separate the men from the women. A few interesting facts. This plaque up here is the original, and it's written in Yiddish. So, and you can see the names of the original, and that's what that is. Then we have a memorial plaque that is the people put a plaque up for family members that pass. When we have a Friday night service or a high holiday service, we do a special prayer for the people who's died on that month. In all synagogues, the bima, and this is where the Torahs are kept, it always faces east towards Jerusalem. A Torah scroll is one of the most holy things you'll find in a synagogue, because that's the 5 books of Moses, but they're all on parchment paper, and they're all written by hand with a turkey quill, and it has to be a certain kind of paint or ink. and it takes years for like a scribe to copy one. Now there are a couple of interesting things. These charcoals on the wall here are all by the same person. His name is Paul Ryman, and his brother John Ryman came to this synagogue and was a big part of our older people. They've since, him and his wife have passed away. But if you look at this picture, is the burning of a synagogue in Worms. It was like a very holy synagogue, and he was there and did a chalk, rendering of that. Now, the interesting thing about Paul Ryman is when he came to America, he became a cartoonist for Marvel. So Paul Ryman actually did a lot of the comic books or worked on a lot of them for Marvel Comics. All right, now I'm going to talk about the third floor in the synagogue, which is kind of hidden because you'll see how you have to go and get up there. It sits behind the door, and back in the day when the synagogue was regularly running, back in like the 1890s or 1888s, what happened is synagogues didn't have their own, per se, rabbi. So what happened is all these communities that were started by then, they would have traveling rabbis that would come. And the traveling rabbis, when they would come here, the front part of the room upstairs was used as in Hebrew they call it a cheder, and it's basically a classroom. So all the kids would have the opportunity to have a Jewish education when these traveling rabbis would come through. And the rabbis would actually stay and sleep up there. So that front part where you see the heater and stuff on the ground is really, that's where he would set up like a bedroom, like a cot there to sleep. And, he would have his meals and be able to wash up. All right, so you might be interested how the uses of the synagogue. We have started again where we would have one Friday night service, the last Friday night of every month. So it's built up to having about like anywhere from 12 to 15 people, which is a pretty good crowd because there's really we have a few people come from Philadelphia that are related to the families from here. And we have a few people that are in the local towns, maybe, Millville, Vineland. And so it's used, there's always last Friday every month at 7:30, there'll always be somebody here. Even if nobody else shows up, we will have some kind of service. So, and also we have a large Mennonite community that surrounds here. There's a few, they have a school and everything, and they're always very interested in the Jewish faith because they adhere to the Old Testament a lot. So a lot of times when they have people coming through, visiting them from Lancaster, even Ohio, they had some people from Canada. They would always call me and I would let them in, and they would really enjoy seeing the synagogue and hearing some stories about it. And also one high holiday, they said, well, the kids would be really interested to see when there's a reading out of the Torah itself, the physical Torah. So they were like, would it be proper? Would it be all right? And we were like, yeah, it's fine. And they brought in, because their school goes from kindergarten to high school. And so they had the whole school in with the teachers. So the whole top was loaded, and they were just it was amazing just how, from little young ones to older kids, high school age, were just so totally their behavior was just like beautiful. They just, you sit through one of these services, it's a long time for an adult sometimes, but they're just very, very well behaved. Like a few people have had bat mitzvahs here, is when the girl comes to age in Judaism. We've had bar mitzvahs here for boys. We will be having a wedding. My daughter wants to have her wedding here. We also have holidays, like we've had Hanukkah parties where we had music and food. And the thing is, since the synagogue itself is considered Orthodox, we adhere to the dietary laws, even though most of us aren't Orthodox, but in respect for the synagogue, we adhere to like the dietary laws. So we won't bring like non-kosher things or non-kosher foods into the synagogue. Part of what we're doing between Acre, that house where the mural is trying to build community. We're like the shul on the hill, We're been here for over 170 years. And all the work, everything in here has always been on donations. Nobody's ever charged like a membership fee or anything, and we've been able to, do the major upkeep to keep it basically as it always was. It's a thing of heart. Like it's kind of like I feel like a duty to my grandparents, since my grandfather actually even helped build it, to preserve it. So mine is like a mixture of spiritual and honor. So, and that's why, I really love doing it, because to me it's honoring, my family, and honoring what all these people that like came here and like got chased out of Russia. So, and back at that time, immigration is what formed this country. Is all these different ideas and different philosophies, and people coming from all these different countries wanting to build a better life for themselves, their children, and the country. So, and immigration at that time wasn't, it still wasn't easy back then. So in the beginning, we'll be able to see it later, but we have over 100 acres that are being farmed in organic now. So, because one of the main things we wanted to do was promote organic farming and farm to table and healthy foods. And since organic and kosher kind of go together, we thought that would be a good thing, and we welcome to bring younger people down to like actually have them come down and farm. And we've had grants. We had some farm things that were crops that were actually grown here in the beginning, that we made a small farm, really like above ground gardens, that had a lot of these original like there was a lot of grapes being grown here. There's tomatoes and different heirloom seeds from that time. All right, now we're at a property of acres, which is the Alliance Community Reboot. And this is an organic vineyard that we put in to produce kosher, organic, with no sulfates wine. And as you can see, it's in its infancy. So last year was the year that it got planted. So now we're waiting for, it to grow up and work on it until we'll get a harvest. So it'll be a couple of years, but there is farming being done right here in Norma, and part of the Alliance. And that was one part of our thing with the synagogue is tied to the Alliance Community Reboot, but it's a separate thing. But Acre encompasses all the farmland and a lot of the different teaching things that'll be done over by where the mural is. And so just to show that there's actually people that are interested in doing organic and coming up with ideas and different things to grow. And we're always looking for things. Like last year, we had a harvest of organic turnips. And there was a man with a restaurant in Philly that really was interested because he did vegetarian, and he smoked the turnips and was making subs out of the turnips. So there's always a need for, healthy foods to get to the cities and things like that. Because we've also worked with Phil Abundance on certain projects way back, and to promote healthy foods in the food, they call them food deserts in the cities, where people are getting their food out of, a Wawa, or they're, getting paying $10 for an apple, like a loose apple, where, if they can, people eat healthier, they're happier, and for their own health, they're healthy. So part of our thing with the farming is keeping it to organic and sustainable agriculture. And that's something that the project with Acre was working on for like 4 years now. So